So I'll just start off just with a quick moment to just say what it is that Liology is, just from a general point of view. It's a framework, a framework for experiencing life in an integrated, embodied, and connected manner. But I think everyone here in the room knows about climate disruption. That doesn't need so much of an introduction. And you know, this graph really, a lot of people here probably are familiar with it already. It kind of says really what the story is all about. This is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And as we can see here, it's been a number of years already that we passed the sustainable level of 350 parts per million. And now we're above 400 and moving rapidly in the wrong direction. So we're all aware of that. But the thing is, climate change, even climate change, massive as it is really just one symptom of an even greater disruption really in the relationship between humanity and the whole natural world. And so if we think about that from a broader perspective, I often think this graph really gives a sense of how that where that disruption started to take place. This is a graph of the world population for the last 2,000 years. And it's pretty clear, as you see, that things looked fairly stable, and suddenly something changed drastically, and it moved in a very different direction. And really, this graph is kind of symbolic of any number of different graphs of other aspects of humanity's relationship with the natural world, which also has a similar kind of shape to this. Which leads, obviously, to the question, well, what kind of happened around then, a few hundred years ago, to make that change so drastically? And I'd say that probably the most important thing that happened was in Europe at that time, there was this scientific revolution. And the thing about it is, it wasn't just a revolution in science. It was a revolution in worldviews. And one thing that changed around then, for example, is people started to see the world as a machine, this gigantic, incredibly complicated contraption of a machine. And people started to get excited by the idea of actually conquering nature. This is Francis Bacon, who many people think of as like the prophet of the scientific age, who got people excited with this notion that we should establish and extend the power of dominion of the human race itself over the universe. And we should render ourselves the masters and possessors of nature. And this energized generations of thinkers in Europe. And in fact, they sort of succeeded only too well. That thinking led to the Industrial Revolution and the sort of conquest of nature, if you will, over those hundreds of years. That thinking also led to this notion that Europeans had the right and power to conquer other societies around the world through militaristic imperialism and colonialism, which kind of led to this. This is actually a picture of Beijing. Right now, just a typical day in Beijing where the smog is so bad that people die 10 years earlier than they otherwise should. So in a way, I put conquest here in quotes, because at this point it's not quite clear really who is conquering whom. But what we can see from this kind of shift is that a worldview can actually shape the values of a culture. And those values actually shape history, the direction of history. But those ideas that started in the 1600s, they didn't just come out of nowhere. They actually came out of a much longer couple of millennia of a particular way of thinking about the world, a worldview that was really unique to Europe, in fact. There was this view of a split universe, the sense that there was some kind of transcendent God up there in the heavens, and the material world was absolutely different from that sort of place of transcendence. And that was actually paralleled in the sense of what it was to be a human, that there was some sort of eternal soul that linked with that transcendence, and a body that was separate from the soul, that had something to do with the material world. And this kind of underlying way of thinking about the universe, about the cosmos, was what led to this unsustainable, it was this sort of undergirding of this unsustainable worldview that it's okay to pray to that source of transcendence up there. even while we sort of ransack nature down below. But meanwhile, all those 2 millennia or more that the West was developing this way of thinking, over in East Asia, and particularly in China, it was a very different worldview that people used to understand their relationship with the universe. So the traditional Chinese saw meaning, instead of being transcendent up there, they saw it as being intrinsic to the natural world. They saw the universe as being in constant flow and everything being connected. And when they tried to think about how these connections actually work, what was it that connected everything, they had a name for all these different connections. Those patterns that connect everything, they called the Li. And then when they would try to think about what the Li as this gigantic system of all the universe connected together like one complete system, they had a name for that too. It's a name that we all know. They call that the Tao, like the pattern of patterns. Now, in recent decades, systems thinkers, and we're honored to have one of the leading of those in our room here with us this evening. But systems thinkers have started to think of the world and the universe in a way that is quite similar to how the traditional Chinese thought about it. Systems thinkers have begun to recognize that living entities are really complex, self-organized, dynamical systems, and that everything is connected in these non-linear ways. So, in the word of one famous systems theorist, Edward Lorenz, who was the founder of chaos theory, he asked this question: is it possible that the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil could lead to a tornado in Texas? And systems thinkers began to recognize that there were universal patterns in nature. So some of the patterns that we might find something as small and complex as neurons in the brain, we might also find similar kind of patterns in something as far away and vast as a distant galaxy. So these are some of the interplays between traditional Chinese thought and modern systems thinking. But to give you a little bit more of a sense of what the Li is really about, I'm going to play you just a short video, which kind of gives a nice feeling of that.
The study of patterns in nature is not something that is very familiar in the West. But in ancient China, this science was known as Li. Li reflects the dynamic order and pattern in nature. But it is not pattern thought of as something static, frozen, or unchanging, like a mosaic. It is dynamic pattern as embodied in all living things. The arteries of leaves, the markings of the tortoise and the vein patterns on rocks are all expressions of nature's secret language in art. The labyrinth is one of many Li patterns. It is found in coral structures, mushrooms like the morel, cabbages. The branching pattern is another Li pattern, or archetypal pattern, that is observable at all levels and all fractal scales. Take, for example, this incredible image of a supercomputer simulation known as the Millennium Run, showing the distribution of dark matter in the local universe. It was created by the Max Planck Society in Germany. Dark matter is essentially what we previously thought of as empty space. It is like an invisible nervous system that runs throughout the universe. The universe is literally like a giant brain. It is constantly thinking, using a type of dark or hidden energy that science is only starting to understand. Through this immense network, unfathomable energy moves, providing the momentum for the expansion and growth of the universe.
So that's a sense of the Li. But we can also think of the Li as not just being these physical patterns we're looking at there, but really like the patterns that underlie like the organizing principles of the natural world. Something like the sort of ever-moving, ever-present set of patterns that flow through everything in nature and in all our perceptions of the world, including our own consciousness. And so that gives you the sense of what Liology is about. It's an embodied investigation into these patterns that connect us with the universe. And the word Liology represents a fusion of some of that traditional wisdom of the Tao with the scientific rigor of modern systems thinking. And then when we start to pursue that investigation, one of the things that we see is that the interactions between things oftentimes tell us a lot more than the things themselves. So whether it's starlings flocking, or schools of fish in the ocean, ripples in sand dunes, or the entire weather system of the Earth, or the pattern of distant galaxies, it's oftentimes the ways in which these things interact that are more important. Now that's sometimes hard to get your head around, so I'm going to ask you to do something with me. Just for a moment, just close your eyes just for a moment and think of a photograph of yourself when you were a child. Okay, you got that? And so here's one of me when I was a little kid. Now I look at that picture of me, and I know that's me. It's like, you know, that picture of yourself was you. But the amazing thing is that virtually none of the cells that were in that little boy are in me now. And even the few cells that do stay in your body through your whole life, they're continually changing what they're composed of. So I can say for virtual certainty that there's not a single molecule in me right now that was in that little boy. And yet I know that was me. So what is it that connects me with that little boy? Not the stuff I'm made of, but it's those patterns of connectivity, the Li essentially, that is what actually gives us our sense of sustaining, our sense of identity, our sense of who we really are. And then another thing we discover when we start to investigate these patterns is that each pattern is fractally connected within larger patterns. So fractal is a pattern that repeats itself at different scales. It indicates self-organized activity, and it's everywhere in the natural world, from coastlines to leaves, lightning, lungs, neurons, and just about everywhere. And in recent decades, scientists have come to recognize that nature itself can be understood as a fractally connected organism, where each cell is part of an organism. Each organism is part of a community. Each community part of an ecosystem. And all ecosystems part of the overall system of the Earth, which of course sometimes we know as Gaia. So this amazing connectivity that we begin to recognize has some really important implications. Essentially, it means that everything you do in your life creates Li ripples, which affect everything else in the universe. So that's one of the sort of core principles of Liology, is the sense of the ultimate connectivity of everything in the cosmos. Now, it's hard sometimes to sort of get a sense of how all these patterns are there when they're invisible. We can't actually see them. So I wanted to share with you another really brief video, which has to do with a branch of science called Cymatics, which is involved in the visualization of another set of patterns that are usually invisible. Cymatics is about the visualization of sound waves. So as I show this to you, my invitation is to look at, enjoy what we see, and also think about how the Lie patterns that are all around us might also look if they were could be visualized the way you'll see that the sound waves are. Pretty cool stuff. So we could imagine, imagine if we could see these Lie patterns the way that cymatic shows sound patterns. We'd realize that actually we exist in an ocean of Lie, and that we're continually being reformed by the Lie ripples of those around us, even while our Lie ripples are simultaneously reforming them. And meanwhile, of course, the Lie ripples of our civilization are shaping our future. So one of the things I wanted to sort of just touch on in this presentation is how like a worldview shapes values, and how those values shape our Lie, and how our Lie really are what shape history. And those Lie ripples begin within each of us, go out there to the world and out into the future, and shape our future. So I just wanted to leave with just a kind of short thoughts about where our future is actually headed. So we can just look at this sense of this shift in societal complexity, and we all know it's sort of going upward, and it's in this incredibly fast rate. But where is it headed to? There's one scenario which you can sort of think of like a tech conquest scenario, where so many people in our society get excited by like the continued conquest, a greater and greater degree of nature, to some sort of notion of some kind of singularity or something like that. And then there's the other extreme, the real possibility of a total civilizational collapse, as the imbalances that we're all so familiar with may be potentially getting more and more out of control. So the question, of course, that we all care about is there a way to find that middle path, some kind of sustainable flourishing, one that's based on a belief in our shared humanity, that's based on an emphasis on the quality of life rather than the quantity of how much we consume, and one that places value, intrinsic value, on the natural world that we're part of. So what I really just want to leave you with this evening is the sense that the shape of that future depends on all of us. And it depends on those lee ripples that we make from the lives that we lead. So thanks. And so if anyone's interested to just find out any more about Liology, you can check some more stuff at the website, liology.org. And over the last couple of years, I've been holding these community gatherings in Marin, where we've, in sort of small groups, we've explored more what the implications of this kind of connectedness has for ourselves, our own inner experience and connectivity through that. And I'll be holding these gatherings again in Berkeley, starting next spring. So if anyone's interested, just certainly please let me know. Okay, well, thanks very much.
Thank you.